never say that you have reached the very end. When leaden skies a bitter future may portend, for sure the hour for which we yearn will yet arrive, and our marching steps will thunder we survive. For sure the hour for which we yearn will yet arrive, and our marching steps will thunder we survive. Not lead but blood inscribes this bitter song we sing. 'Tis not a caroling of birds upon the wing, but 'twas a people midst the crashing fires of hell that sang this song and fought courageous till it fell. But 'twas a people midst the crashing fires of hell that sang this song and fought courageous till it fell. Sorg nicht, Kind, mal als du gehst dem letzten Weg, wenn die Himmeln bleine verstellen bläue Teg, weil kommen wird noch unser ausgebänkte Schau, uns wird beugt und unser Trott mir seinen da. Weil kommen wird noch unser ausgebänkte Schau, uns wird beugt und unser Trott mir seinen da. Geschrieben ist das Lied mit Blut und nicht mit Blei, es ist nicht ein Lied.
The murder of 6 million European Jews in the Holocaust did not happen overnight. One key step in the Nazi process of separating, controlling, and ultimately murdering Jews was the creation of ghettos. Ghettos were areas of cities or towns where authorities forced Jews to live under miserable conditions, separated from the non-Jewish population. These areas were often enclosed by walls, fences, or barbed wire. And in many ghettos, Jews found ways to resist Nazi persecution in secret and through public acts of violence. By the end of the war, hundreds of thousands of Jews would die in ghettos. Nazis established the first ghetto in German-occupied Poland in October 1939. The Germans and their allies would ultimately force Jews into more than 1,000 ghettos, most in occupied Eastern Europe. Rather than operate the ghettos themselves, the Nazis created Jewish councils to carry out their orders. In many ghettos, Jewish councils did their best to provide a variety of social, economic, and cultural services under brutal and difficult conditions. Jewish council leaders faced impossible moral dilemmas, including whether to provide lists of Jews for deportation. Jewish councils remain a controversial subject. Jewish people tried to maintain their dignity and sense of community in the face of Nazi efforts to dehumanize and degrade them. Even though it was often forbidden to carry out Jewish religious services, many Jews resisted by praying and holding ceremonies in secret. Groups in some ghettos established secret archives. They methodically collected diaries, photographs, artwork, and documents about daily life in the ghettos. Their efforts preserved evidence of the experiences of Jews in Nazi-occupied Europe. In many ghettos, harsh and inhumane conditions often proved to be deadly. Deliberate overcrowding led to the rampant spread of diseases. There was limited access to running water, food, and medicine. Fuel for heat in the winter was scarce. And amid these conditions, many Jews were forced to carry out hard labor. Hundreds of thousands of Jews died in ghettos from disease, starvation, cold, unprovoked violence, or suicide. Once the Nazis decided to commit mass murder, the purpose of the ghettos changed. Beginning in 1941, the Germans began destroying ghettos and murdering the inhabitants. The Nazis and their collaborators murdered ghetto residents in mass shooting operations or deported them to killing centers. They also created new ghettos, specifically to concentrate Jewish communities prior to their murder. Ghettos were a key means by which the Nazis and their allies isolated, controlled, and ultimately murdered millions of Jews. And the impact on those who managed to survive the ghettos lasted well beyond the end of the war.
Before World War II, Warsaw was the center of the Jewish population of Europe. Jews had lived there for over 500 years. By the eve of the war, fully 30% of the city was Jewish. In 1939, the Germans conquered Poland very quickly, and World War II began. The Germans had planned to deport the Jews. However, the plans didn't immediately succeed, and so, as an interim measure, Jews were concentrated in cities and near railways, and these became ghettos. The ghettos were not an end in and of themselves. They were interim measures, again, on the way to deportation and then later on to mass murder. Once the ghetto became a reality, the Jews trapped inside were its prisoners. They could no longer come and go freely as they wanted to. They literally went to bed one night and woke up the next morning surrounded by walls. And now at the entrance to the ghetto stood very intimidating symbols of authority, German guards and Polish policemen. Any Jew who was found outside the ghetto was unceremoniously shot. The Jews were sealed inside the ghetto. In September 1941, a German soldier who was stationed in Poland named Heinz Jost snuck into the Warsaw Ghetto with a camera, even though he was not authorized to take pictures there. Jost took over 150 pictures of the escalating chaos of the life and death in the Warsaw Ghetto. 1941, the year when Jost took the pictures in the ghetto, represents a kind of midpoint in the life of the ghetto. It had been about a year since the ghetto was established, and it would be almost another year until 300,000 of the Jews in the ghetto were taken and murdered at the death camp in Treblinka. At this point in time, the Jews were still struggling to survive the horrific conditions in the ghetto, and yet, as we will see, they had managed to build a society behind the walls of the ghetto with educational institutions, cultural institutions, and mutual assistance.
It is impossible to put into words what we have been through. What happened exceeded our boldest dreams. The Germans ran twice from the ghetto. The dream of my life has risen to become fact. I have been a witness to the magnificent, heroic fighting of Jewish men in battle. The Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, which has become a symbol of Jewish resistance during the Holocaust, broke out on April 19, 1943. It was the first popular urban uprising in Nazi-controlled Europe. On July 22, 1942, the Great Deportation from the ghetto began. By September 21st, the Germans had deported more than 300,000 Jews from the ghetto to the Treblinka extermination camp, where they were murdered. Attempts to organize a fighting underground in the ghetto had begun even before the Great Deportation, but did not come to fruition. Once the deportations began, these efforts resumed, leading to the founding of the Jewish Fighting Organization, ZOB, which encompassed most of the political factions and Jewish youth movements in the ghetto. Mordechai Analevich, 23 years old, a member of Hashomer HaTzair, was made its commander. The Beitar revisionist Zionist youth movement set up its own fighting force, the Jewish Military Union, led by Pavel Frankel and Leib Rodal, which was joined by Jews from other political factions. On January 18, 1943, another forced deportation began. The Jewish underground leadership, believing it to be the onset of the final deportation, initiated resistance in what would later become known as the Small Uprising. Following the deportation, which had been planned to be of limited scope, some in the ghetto believed that the uprising had stopped it short. In light of the certainty of future deportations, and alongside the increased underground activity, many Jews began preparations for hiding in bunkers built in house cellars to be used in defiance of German deportation orders. On April 19, 1943, the eve of Passover, the final deportation began, and the underground organizations again resisted. The Germans were caught off guard by the Jewish resistance and the defiance of the deportation orders. During the first 3 days, street fighting took place in the ghetto. The Jewish Fighting Organization scattered its positions throughout the ghetto. The Jewish Military Union did most of its fighting at Muranovska Square, which for several days was a major center of the fighting. The Germans began systematically torching houses, making the ghetto a fire trap for its inmates. Despite the intense heat and lack of air, food, and water, the bunker residents continued barricading inside. Fighting took place from bunker to bunker, as large German forces burned and detonated the entire ghetto area. On May 8th, The Jewish Fighting Organization Command Bunker, located on 18 Miwa Street, fell with many fighters inside, including Mordechai Anilevich. The ghetto fighters fought bravely for over a month. Many of them were killed during the suppression of the uprising. Of those that were captured, thousands were tortured and shot in the ghetto. Some of the Jews were sent to various camps in the Lublin area. A few managed to escape the ghetto in various ways, continuing underground fighting against the Nazis or surviving on the Aryan side.
Das Lied mit Blut und nicht mit Blei. Es ist nicht ein Lied von so einer Vogel auf der Frei. Das hat ein Volk zwischen Fahlen dicker Wind. Das Lied gesungen mit ner Gannes in die Hand. Das hat ein Volk zwischen Fahlen dicker Wind. Das Lied gesungen mit ner Gannes in die Hand.
This is Lillian Boraks-Nemetz, and I'm excited to have her with me. She's a survivor, and I'm going to ask Lillian, and you can see Lillian's book behind her, Mouth of Truth. And I'm going to ask you, Lillian, to tell us a little bit about yourself, where you were born, where you grew up, what was your experiences before the war, and then let's talk about your experience of what you wanted to chat and talk about today.
Well, I was born in Warsaw, Poland, right next door to where Hitler came to power. And I had a wonderful, very short life before everything ended, before the Blitzkrieg. My parents, my family were very comfortable. My father was a lawyer, my mother a socialite. I took dancing lessons, and I was just about to enter grade 1 when this was at the end of our summer vacation in a village called Michalin, my grandfather's villa, where one day on September 1st, 1939, that life ended. And I heard banging, and I heard explosions, and I saw airplanes flying overhead, and I was alone on this, on the veranda, because I was a slow eater, so everybody left. And then I saw my father running towards me, and he picked me up, and we went to a bomb shelter, I saw them digging this ditch. And I experienced fear and death on that day for the first time. But before I start telling my own story, in the book Mouth of Truth, I wrote some passages of my father's voice, giving my father a voice. This is the very, very beginning when we had to start wearing Jews were supposed to wear them. They were white with blue stars of David. Children under 6 didn't have to wear them, but my father, before the war, even before entering the Warsaw Ghetto, they had already started experiencing the loss of human rights, his right to practice law. My uncle, his right to practice medicine. Teachers and professors, Jewish, were let go by universities and schools, and little children were kept home instead of going to school because they were being bullied or had to sit at the back of the class. Jewish people were not allowed to use the same sidewalk as the Christian Poles, or go into parks or cafes or restaurants. Everywhere, and it started with words, everywhere you saw a big sign, Jude verboten, forbidden. Jew, forbidden. Jews and dogs, forbidden. And this is some background in my father's voice. As a young boy, I had observed the Jewish community with curiosity. Now this world was open to me. Although my respect for religious rituals deepened as I began to understand the whys and wherefores of the practices and prayers, I was not able to participate as a full believer. Still, I secretly became proud of my Jewish heritage. I kept this newly evolved feeling hidden, while in my public life I considered myself a Pole, a citizen of Europe, influenced by German, French, and Russian cultures. In the meantime, next door in Germany, Hitler and the Nazi Party came to power. We heard rumors about how Jews were treated in Germany. I feared the scourge would soon come to Poland and argued with my father that we should all get out before it was too late. It'll never happen here, said my grandfather categorically. So we stayed. And in 1938, another daughter, Tereska, was born. Strange. I thought at the time that one daughter was born on the eve of Hitler's rise to power, while the other on the eve of the night of broken glass Kristallnacht. Soon 1939 approached, and with it the Blitzkrieg. I suddenly became a man standing on the surface of ice that was cracking beneath my feet. Weeks after Poland lost the war, and 1 week into the occupation, Jews lost their human rights. Jewish shops, businesses, and offices were closed with signs on their doors. Juden verboten. Professionals were let go from their places of work. One of my best friends, Dr. Levin, came to my office one afternoon with tears in his eyes. The hospital had let him go and got rid of other Jewish doctors as well.
Okay. Well, it's a heartbreaking start of this program, but I'm glad that you were able to bring this forward. So let me switch a little bit to your past. I know you were a child during this period, but can you describe the memories that you've had during this period for our audience, and then walk us through a little bit of your situation? You know, were you in the camps? Which camps?
We returned to Warsaw from the country after the Blitzkrieg, and our apartment, we had a huge, like a condominium style apartment. It was destroyed. Everything was broken and taken and stolen, and I walked into my own room, which I was so proud of. The books were torn, the teddy bears cut open, doll's eyes gouged out. My father tried to explain things to me, and I understood. I grew up very quickly. I mean, I stopped being a child. One day we heard a huge noise on the street, and there was a large car with an open roof with German officers in it. And we heard a voice bellowing out through the speaker, "All Jews of Warsaw must go into the Warsaw Ghetto, where the wall is, or be severely punished." And of course, before that happened, I went for a walk with my dad, and we saw horrible things in the street already happening. Jews being singled out by the SS officers in black uniforms with swastikas, beaten. Old Jew was told to dance. Another one was strung. A young man was strung on a tree branch exposing his circumcision, and people stood around and laughed. And then I saw men building a wall from bricks. And I asked my father, what is this? What is this wall? And he said that this will one day be a wall that will enclose us, that we'll have to go, and he knew we'll have to go and live there.
And how
And
old,
each day
how old were you during this period?
7
Okay.
years old. And he also told me that these people building the wall were Jewish. And they had to build this wall with their own money and pay for those materials, which were brick, barbed wire, and shards of glass. That's how the wall was built. And every day it got taller and taller until it reached 10 feet. And it was 1940 when that announcement came from these officers in the car. The wall was completed. We were told to take as much as we could, and there were 4 of us, my little sister, myself, my mother, and my father, and we each had a little suitcase and things to take with us, and they were all going towards this checkpoint, an opening in the wall, of which there are a few. And I remember getting to the opening, and my mother stood ahead of us holding the child, and she dropped her bag, and the gendarme, that's like a soldier guard at the checkpoint, took his rifle and hit her on the head and yelled, "Schneller, hurry up." And she bent down and picked it up, and we went ahead. We had a room prescribed for us, one room, in about a 3-room apartment where 25 people lived. It was incredibly crowded. And I remember crossing the threshold between the area in Warsaw and the Jewish part.
In this photograph, we see Jews riding in rickshaws, which was a very unique method of transportation that was used by the Jews in the ghetto because cars and vehicles were banned. This was the way they had to deal with their restricted reality. But what we don't see in the photo speaks volumes about the life that they were forced to build. Encircled by walls, the Jews were cut off from food supplies. They had their businesses taken away. They were completely dependent on the Germans for their rations, and those were completely insufficient. They were forced into a reality where they had to smuggle.
The traffic of rickshaws, the Warsaw Ghetto's distinctive means of transport, which the Jews have taken over from the Japanese and the Chinese, they couldn't even dream about fixing up the rickshaws the way the Jews have done. Under the seat, there is an empty space where several sacks of flour can be squeezed, and the driver sits on top feigning innocence. I'm just taking a ride down the street.
Illegal smuggling brought in fully 80% of the food that was consumed by the Jews in the ghetto. There were big organized smugglers who quickly became very rich, and they became the ghetto's elite. And there were other types of smugglers. These were usually very small children who smuggled food into the ghettos just to keep their families alive. This type of smuggling really turned family life on its head because it went against the normal fabric of the family and of society. Smuggling was also very, very dangerous. Anyone who was caught outside the ghetto smuggling was immediately and unceremoniously shot. This, of course, created an awful dilemma for parents who allowed their children to smuggle because they never knew whether their children would return.
And it was like going from light into darkness. The apartment was dark, and there was a terrible stench, terrible smell. And because it was old and dirty, that part of Warsaw, it was slum kind of, it was Nalewki. It used to be an old Orthodox, Jewish Orthodox section, but eventually it got neglected and it was just a wreck. Anyway, this apartment had one kitchen and one bathroom. Both were broken. Somehow my parents made do with whatever. And the people around, I could see them putting up yellow sheets around their beds for privacy, because each room had to be a bedroom, living room, whatever. And they had kids. And then I played with a few kids in the courtyard, and they started disappearing. And then, of course, we read we were quarantined for typhus. That particularly triggered, that memory was very, very triggered when the pandemic occurred here. And, I always try to put things together, but it's amazing. It was like we were quarantined for typhus, and here we were quarantined for COVID-19. It was a terrible education center, and they have an outreach program, and I'm a member of the outreach speakers. Mm-hmm. We are sent to schools to educate students against racism.
Nice.
So I've had to tell the story many, many times. But each time I tell the story, what you see outside is not what you would see inside if you were in there. The heart starts beating fast. I have tears at the edge of my eyeballs, and I'm choked up, but I try to go on.
And I wanted to ask you, when you were in the line moving to the ghetto, was there any resistance where people were just in line?
There was a fear because we were not ready. We were, this is something that today we are heroes. We are not heroes. We were not. We were victims. We were completely victimized, just as the hostages are today, by these monster Nazis. I mean, they wanted to murder all of us. Mm-hmm. There is a huge parallel between that and October 7. Huge parallel.
So let me stop you there. Often when I put my programs together, and I'm putting a program from a Yom HaShoah, I'm reluctant to discuss October 7th in the same context as the Holocaust. And I have had pushback from my community not to conflate the two. The Holocaust was unprecedented with 6 million. Yes, Hamas killed only 1,200 on one day. The Holocaust was mass murder on a strategic, state-sponsored way. Where do you come out with a Yom HaShoah October 7th discussion?
I gave an address of Yom HaShoah. Joy was there, I think. I to the whole Jewish community. And I remember Ambassador, his name was Ergun, Israeli ambassador to the United States. I think he was speaking at United Nations. And he was saying how on one beautiful morning, Shabbat morning, the sun was shining. The Jews were all ready to start their day. And everything was peaceful and quiet in this village, Israeli village. And suddenly, out of the blue, came the murderers. And on the same kind of sunny day, in Warsaw, Poland, in 1939, I lost my childhood.
I pray, I hope, that we can all leave this place today even more committed to work together and create a brighter, a better, a wiser, more compassionate global narrative free of anti-Semitism. We shall not rest peacefully until all our hostages are free from their captivity, and we shall and we promise, young, middle, and old alike, to carry the torch of memory on behalf of all those who no longer have voice.
And so did other Jewish children.
So again, I want to be sensitive here. What kind of loss did you suffer being in the ghetto? Did your parents survive? Did your sister survive?
My sister was murdered.
Mm-hmm.
My cousins, my uncles, and my aunts died in Treblinka concentration camp on arrival. My father, out of desperation to save us because we were starving, we had rations of 184 calories a day per person. And even that, we couldn't get decent food for that. My little sister, she was very young, and, we were cold. We didn't have any coal or wood.
How old was your sister?
She was born in 1938, so she was 2 years old. Yeah. And my father just looked at us and he walked out. When he came back, he was very emotional, and he sat sort of astride in a chair with his, I still remember looking at him, his head in his hands. He joined the Jewish ghetto police. Not to mistreat the population as people would have it and talk and gossip and say horrible things, but to help us survive. Because if you were a Jewish policeman in the ghetto, you were safe from deportations as 42 was approaching. That's when they really started. And herds of Jews were taken out into a place called Umschlagplatz, which means gathering place, where trains stood waiting, cattle cars stood waiting for Jews to be packed into them and taken to Treblinka death camp. No one really knew where they were going until the end because Nazis kept everything secret. You asked how is it possible to talk about the Holocaust on October 7th? Well, in the tunnels, they built this whole city under Gaza. There were handbooks found with the final solution. They copied the whole final solution that was organized by the Nazi SS, by Hitler, to murder all the Jews. And that's the comparison. They followed. There were notes on there how they followed that handbook. And Mein Kampf was found as well.
כי ראיתי את דרכי נעלמת ביער סבוך בין קירות חורשים ובתוך האדמה המדממת רגליי ננעצו היכו שורשים ולרגע יכולתי לשמוע עלי מלמדים שירתם ורציתי לעלות גבוה לפרוח איתם הכרתי טיפותיו של הגשם נקבות בתוכי יורדות מתחתיי והרוח קרה ונואשת, הקפיאה אותי, הכבידה עליי. ולרגע יכולתי לגוע בקצה הכאב האפור, ורציתי לעלות גבוה, לראות את האור, לראות את האור. אומרים השמיים כחולים מעלינו, מלאים באורות, אולי יום אחד אוכל גם אני לראות, לראות.
מזל טוב. קודם כל מוריה, נשאלה. אל תגידי, אל תגידי, אל תגידי.
ונפלתי לארץ בשקט, עצמתי עיניי,
נשיפה, נשיפה למזל, נשיפה למזל.
והרגשתי איך אני מתפרקת מכל כאביי, מכל בדידותי. ולרגע יכולתי לברוח, כנוצה על כנפה של ציפור, והצלחתי לעלות גבוה, לראות את האור, לראות את האור. ולרגע יכולתי לברוח, כנוצה על כנפה של ציפור, והצלחתי לעלות גבוה, לראות את האור, לראות את האור. ולרגע יכולתי לברוח, כנוצה על כנפה של ציפור, והצלחתי לעלות גבוה, לראות את האור, לראות את האור, לראות את האור, לראות את האור.
So my father brought us, I don't remember eating in the ghetto, but I remember one thing. My father brought a loaf of bread and some sugar. And my mother gave us a slice of bread with sugar on it. And it was the greatest delicacy I'd ever tasted. I mean, still I can taste it. It was incredible to have that sugar that on the bread. And my father was of the opinion that a family couldn't stay together in this mess. I mean, there were children lying on the streets, dying, and people were taking off their shoes and stealing their clothes. A woman dropped, we saw it all, a woman dropped a pail of soup, a pot of soup, onto the sidewalk. And a hungry man ran and licked it off the pavement. There was overcrowdedness, like 400,000 or more eventually came from other villages and towns. And the typhus, well, that was the big thing that the propaganda itself was the same of Hamas as it was of Nazi propaganda. The same propaganda, how Jews were no good, how bad they were, how like vermin, like, don't go near them, you'll catch typhus. I mean, horrible things were said about Jews, just the same way as they are being said now. And the Hamas propaganda, we must never, this was a mini Holocaust.
So you have no problem conflating the two?
None whatsoever. None whatsoever.
If you don't think that hostages should be brought home, should be released, then you're not a good person. It is a dilemma because these people, I know them, they're not actually bad people. They actually think that they're fighting for what's right. What happened to them is that Hamas propaganda is really, really good. It did not start on October 7th. They've been working on it for years. A lot of these people get their information from TikTok and from social media. If when I scroll on TikTok, I get a lot of pro-Palestinian content. So you can just imagine how someone who doesn't have a cousin who's a hostage, how much that type of content they
We children were like the hostages of Hitler. We were treated as hostages. We had no freedom, no food, no human rights were allowed us. We were held in the dark, in darkness. And then of course, because my father decided that we can't stay, families were not good together, not like Aunt Frank. They went up to the attic, all of them, and they were caught. So he started looking for places to get us out. He felt the children should get out first. So I was supposed to go out first. He made arrangements with a Christian friend of his in Otwock, county of Otwock, not far from Warsaw, to get me out. The day came, I was supposed to go out. I got sick with scarlet fever. I couldn't go out. So I remember through, like blurry, my mother coming to me with my little sister and saying, say goodbye to your sister. And she was wearing this little furry brown coat and hat with bunny's ears because it was wintry out. And you know what I did? I pushed them away and I said, leave me alone. Can't you see I'm sick? And I turned to the wall. The next day, maybe the next 2 days later, when my fever went away, I looked out and I could see my sister was gone. Her things were gone. She was taken out instead of me. I never said goodbye, and I never saw her again. And I've been living with this guilt all my life. So then my turn came again to go out. Well, I was bigger, so it wasn't like, their kids were smuggled through holes, they took bricks from under the wall, and especially boys that were very thin could slide under the brick, and then the Christians would toss potatoes or bread to them, and they would take it into the ghetto. There was a huge black market anyway. They did the black market at the Jewish cemetery on Okopova Street. And without the black market, more population would have starved to death. And so, anyway, these boys were later caught. It's a whole story. But then, of course, little kids could be smuggled. I could not. I was already 8 or 9 years old, going on 9. So my father devised a plan. One morning, he took me away. I said goodbye to my mom. And another thing was, being a policeman also, he was able to get my mother a card, a working card, which you call a green card in the States. It was a card that, as long as you were slave laboring for the Nazis, because they had businesses inside the ghetto. They had factories. One was Schultz and one was Tobin's. My mother got a card to work at Schultz. And even a few times she would smuggle me in, though children weren't allowed. And I would sit under the table and collect scraps. And then we would share a bowl of soup made of potato peel and a piece of bread, like sawdust. And it was before I left the ghetto. But one day, I'm getting a little ahead of it, this is important. They would come to a section of the ghetto. This was a process of elimination. They would come to a section of the ghetto, with police, with whoever they could find, and they would take me get the people out of their dwellings into a courtyard where they had an officer checking the Ausweis, which was the identification card. And he said, go out there and join the line. So it was my mother and I at the time. My sister had already gone out. No, my sister was still there. This was before she left. And we were and we joined the line on the way to the Umschlagplatz. So there we were. You know, this was life. We could have gotten to Umschlagplatz. We could have gotten onto the cattle cars and then be gassed to death by Zyklon B or whatever else. They use cyanide as well. And we were walking in this line, and I was grabbing my mother's arm, crying, Mommy, you won't leave me. And my sister was crying, and I was digging into my mother's flesh, and she said, of course I won't. And then suddenly arms came at the back. We felt a pair of arms, and we were thrown into an open gate of a building and told to lie down on the ground. And the line went ahead without us. So that was another bit of luck.
And that line was going to death.
Yeah. So this was after that my father said, okay, you're getting out. Okay, so I'm back to the day when it was my turn. The being saved from going to Umschlagplatz and, as you said, to death. It was my turn to go out of the ghetto. So one morning, one dreary, cold morning, my father took me. I said goodbye to my mom. We went down the street, closer to a checkpoint. No one was allowed to get out of the ghetto. I mean, even the police, like my father, he was more like a guard of the factories and so on. It wasn't allowed to go. Everything had to be inside the ghetto. Only the blue police could go back and forth, or the German police. But my father did this. He took me to this house, to this old building near the checkpoint. Cockroaches, freezing cold, sat on my suitcase. I waited. He waited. And another Jewish policeman came, his friend. My father gave him a box of jewelry. So there was a bracelet, there was a diamond ring, and then there was also a pair of leather gloves and soap. And people may wonder, who needs that? Well, the German army needed it. The German army loved those things. Anyway, there were a few other things, and the Jewish policeman said, okay, he's going to take them, and he'll be back. So my father is pacing the floor, and we're waiting. Finally, he comes back. He said, I gave these things to them, which means he bribed the guards at the checkpoint through his acquaintanceship with one blue policeman. Blue policeman was a Polish policeman. He bribed them, and they said she can come, meaning me, I can go through the checkpoint. But they were known not to keep their word. When you ever passed the checkpoint, you could see them just standing there in their green uniforms and the helmets and the guns, the rifles pointing into the center of the checkpoint, shooting anyone who walked through. So my father had to make a decision. Only 7%, if that many, of children survived the ghetto. The ghetto was huge. It was the biggest ghetto in Europe and the most horrible ghetto. People call it now a type of concentration camp. And walking through this checkpoint, after what the man said, 50-50 chance also of survival. So what chance did I have to survive? So my father decided I should go anyway. We went out of the building and we went towards the checkpoint, which wasn't very far. We stopped just before, so they didn't see us. And my father gave me a piece of paper. And that moment I lost my identity. I was not me. Me was non-existent. Different name, different age, because they didn't want me to go to school. Someone might see me. Different parents. And I was baptized Christian. He gave me this paper. He put it in the pocket of my coat, gave me my little suitcase, and he said, now walk. Walk straight through and don't look back. My father, he's coaching me what I should do and not to look back at him. As I said before, kids had to grow up really quickly. That's why the childhood was lost. I was a kid, you know, and I started walking towards the checkpoint, and I saw them standing there pointing the guns at the center. And it was not a long walk, but it was the longest walk of my life. And I got to the center, shaking knees, and those guys turned away like that. I saw them, the guns turned away from the center, they turned away, and I walked through. And as soon as I
just want to move a little bit forward because I want to make sure we capture everything that we wanted to talk about today. Your parents survived or didn't survive?
In a matter of speaking, they did, and in another matter of speaking, they didn't, and I can tell you why.
So they
survived the war, but they were ruined.
Yeah.
Financially, physically, morally, mentally. They went to get they lost my child.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, we were in Warsaw under communists. And my uncle Bronek, who was the only member of my mother's huge family who survived because he got out before 1939, he could see it coming. He took his wife and two little girls. They drove from Warsaw to Russia. And through Russia, they got on a ship to Italy. And my aunt, my uncle's wife, she had a cousin in New York. So they were able to be sponsored because America, none of the countries were taking Jews.
Right.
Yeah, so they got to America. And after the war, he found us through an organization actually called UNRWA, different UNRWA, but it was a different UNRWA. It was UNRRA ... And they found us. He sent us a letter, and he said, get out before the Soviets finalize their takeover. Mm-hmm. So one night we got out and into Stockholm. But we practically crashed because the plane ran out of gas on an island of Gotland. And they waited for a freighter to come and give us some more gas so we could get on to Stockholm. In Stockholm, my uncle arranged a hotel for us called Sirena, I remember, in Karlsbadplatz. And we stayed there until he sent lawyers with affidavits. It was a process of about 6 to 8 months, if I remember. And eventually went to Göteborg. We got on a ship called Drottningholm, who was one of the first ships to cross the Atlantic after the war, so they had a radar boat in front for searching for mines. And we passed through Halifax and Liverpool, eventually landed, came through to the New York port of New York. We got a choice between Cuba and Canada. And I know in my father's passport, there's a visa to Cuba. But he decided he wanted Canada because he read about it and he loved it. He read these books by Arthur Kessler and he thought it would be great to go to Canada. But he got very sick. He got sick because the Nazis beat him up in the area of his kidney. And something grew there and it was misdiagnosed and he died.
When was that?
1948.
Sorry. So you are now in Canada.
Yeah, in Montreal.
I'd like to know a little bit about you and your career and what you did there. So you've come from absolute worse than hell. And you're now growing up as a woman in Canada? Is it always Vancouver?
No. It was Montreal. Okay. And anyway, I adopted a new personality. I was two people. The three faces of Eve? Well, these were two faces of me. The girl who went into hiding, because we missed the whole hiding experience, of course. I was hiding for 2 years. And the girl that was in hiding never came out until 1973. And so I was never myself. I was always different. And I was funny and I was, and I failed my classes. I didn't understand English. I knew more French than I did English. And then when my dad died, my mother married again a man from Vancouver. So I ended up in Vancouver. And she sent me to a Christian boarding school on Vancouver Island because she didn't want her teenage daughter with a new husband. So I went to a Christian school where I wasn't allowed to say that I was Jewish, here in Canada, in Victoria. St. Margaret's School, being a Jew. But I am a Jew and I'm proud of being a Jew.
Which book is 2018? Which title?
Mouth of Truth.
Okay.
Because that's when I did a lot of traveling to find out how my sister died. And that's a story. And The Old Brown Suitcase about coming to Canada and how difficult it was in my father's death and my mother's marriage. And I was basically alone through the whole thing. I self-published this book recently, only just recently.
You're quite beautiful.
I was. It's just, I thought it worked because this woman is looking inward. She's not looking at anything. And some of the poems here, like Testimony of a Hidden Child and things like that.
So we have a lot of authors or wannabe authors in the audience watching this today. What is the top tips that you have learned the hard way through the hard knocks of writing and publishing?
I would say to them, first of all, whatever you experienced has to be meaningful. It has to have meaning. And you can give it meaning by doing something positive in life, whether it's helping people, whether it's writing about it. And you have to have that goal because then you make something out of nothing. The Holocaust was a useless, horrible thing. How can you heal from it? How can you make something out of it? And the people who suffered October 7th in Israel feel the same way. Articles are coming out, books are coming out now. Talking about it helps. You don't keep things a secret, things like that. You don't keep a secret, and you tell the truth, and you strive to make something positive out of something negative. And that's healing. And talking to schools, talking to students, to even discussions among your peers. I have a book club here in the building where I live, and they're all reading and 31st of March, they're all reading this book, Mouth of Truth. And they just can't believe it, I mean, people don't know what happened to us. And this helps them to understand what's happening now.
Tip. Do you have another tip? That's a good tip. Do you have another tip?
Well, the other tip is courage. All this takes courage. If you think that you're a victim, then you won't accomplish anything. You need to be brave and believe in yourself and believe in your cause, and really make and find meaning in life. And I think a lot of people have to do that. And I find that I found healing by going to schools and speaking to students, and by writing. So art heals, whether you paint or knit, or whatever you do. It's it has a healing power.
Okay.
Creating something, creation versus destruction.
In Nazi-occupied Poland, 1940, 450,000 Jews were sent to the Warsaw Ghetto. Surrounded by the walls they were forced to build themselves, the Jews were isolated from the outside world. They faced extreme winter conditions, overcrowding, systematic starvation, rampant diseases, and relentless brutality from the Nazi regime. By 1942, hundreds of thousands of Jews were sent from the ghetto to the Treblinka extermination camp. Only around 60,000 remained within the ghetto, many being orphaned youth. However, unknown to the Nazis, these remaining survivors were organizing a rebellion, historically known as the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. On the eve of Passover, on April 19, 1943, German SS officers invaded the Warsaw Ghetto with the intent to eradicate it and the people within it. Positioned around the ghetto in bunkers and hideouts, the Jewish resistance refused to surrender. With the few makeshift weapons they were able to acquire, the resistance attacked and fought back for weeks on end.
I'd like to ask you how you felt about having the Seder in the bunker.
That was so sad. We tried to make still sort of acknowledge to ourselves and to God that we're still Jewish, that we want to keep the tradition. But what we felt in our hearts, that I doubt whether I can describe it. That was so sad, so tragic, the circumstances. And we were here, we remember our pre-fathers and all this and this hard times in slavery and out of slavery, and here we hardly have a hope to survive a day or night or anything at all.
And the following day we were sitting, we already went, it was Erev Pesach, we went we jumped through the ceiling down to the, and my grandfather threw a package of matzah because it was before Pesach, maybe we will not go out from there. And we were sitting and we heard a tank coming and shooting and crying and wounded people, and this thing became. And this was one day, and the second day we didn't leave even. The second day, all of a sudden, smoke broke in, and the window was bomb was put, a fire bomb, and the window was broken, the glass was broken, and smoke came into the room, and we have to leave it. We have to leave because everything was burning, the whole house was burning, and we have to go into the backyard to our bunker underneath the cellar.
Tell me about the Seder.
Because that was the evening, and we tried to have the candles on the table and white tablecloths. The table, that was a table from these boards done, and something under, how the things sometimes are done. And with the candles and with the benches. and all this sort of, to be able to live on somehow, to stand the time, you know, to survive somehow.
April 18 was the first night of this uprising. Was the first Seder night, really. And we didn't go to work. The printing was closed because they closed up this building where we lived. We couldn't go out even from the building. Because these people all work for the Germans, German institutions of Germans, factories or something like the printing and the other things, which were the workers lived in the same building. But we heard what's going on. We couldn't leave the building. Till about 8 days later, they took us out of the building. The Germans took us out.
Was there any reading of the Haggadah that night?
Not now, please.
Did you in any way suspect what the next day was going to bring?
We never know what the next day will be.
We were in a bunker 8 days, all over Pesach. In the end, the last day of Pesach, somehow dogs around and Germans around, they uncovered the bunker. So we went out and they took us from there to Treblinka.
Never say that you have reached the very end, when leaden skies a bitter future may portend. For sure the hour for which we yearn will yet arrive, and our marching steps will thunder we survive. For sure the hour for which we yearn will yet arrive, and our marching steps will thunder we survive. Not lead but blood inscribes this bitter song we sing. 'Tis not a caroling of birds upon the wing, but 'twas a people midst the crashing fires of hell that sang this song and fought courageous till it fell. But 'twas a people midst the crashing fires of hell that sang this song and fought courageous till it fell. Sorg nicht keinmal, als du gehst dem letzten Wege, den Himmeln bleine verstellen bleie Tege, weil kommen wird noch unser ausgebänkte Schau, uns wird erbeugt und so trat mir seinen da. Weil kommen wird noch unser ausgebänkte Schau, uns wird erbeugt und so trat mir seinen da. Geschrieben ist das Lied mit Blut und nicht mit Blei. Es ist nicht ein Lied amidst the crashing fires of hell that sang this song and fought courageous till it fell. But 'twas a people amidst the crashing fires of hell that sang this song and fought courageous till it fell. Sorg nicht keinmal, als du gehst dem letzten Wege, den Himmeln bleine verstellen bleie Tege, weil kommen wird noch unser ausgebänkte Schau, uns wird erbeugt und so trat mir seinen da. Weil kommen wird noch unser ausgebänkte Schau, uns wird erbeugt und so trat mir seinen da.